Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cosmic Convention, the Pickles Parker Podcast, where we talk about the greatest show in the galaxy, Doctor Who. Now it's the New Year's special today. Yes, I did a Halloween special, a Christmas special and now a New Year's special. And today I've brought back a guest who I had on all the way back in August in episode 3. I've brought back Richard Lloyd. Say hello, Richard.
Hello, it's great to be back.
Yeah, awesome. Now, as it's the New Year's special, I suppose we'll be doing a lot of reflecting. That's kind of the general idea, I suppose, for this podcast. But just before we get into that, how are you doing, Richard? Are you doing good?
I'm not doing too badly, thanks. Yeah, I've had a nice Christmas
Awesome.
And very much looking forward to Revolution of the Daleks in just a couple of days now. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It's good to hear that you had a good Christmas. I also had a good Christmas as well, which is a relief after all the shenanigans that's happened this year. And I think just generally this year, I mean, you look at it, on the face of it, it hasn't been a very good year. I don't think it's obviously disrupted most of what we've been doing. Some people have been affected by it worse than others. Me personally, I mean, my GCSEs got cancelled, so in a way I was kind of happy about that. But, just in general, a lot of things haven't gone particularly well for people. But I suppose, with Doctor Who, I'd say while 2020 hasn't been, a particularly good year, I'd say at least in contrast to 2019, shall we say, 2020's been a pretty decent year for Doctor Who, I'd say.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's definitely been a lot more going on, not least with having a full series,
Well, yeah.
but even beyond that, all the lockdown Who stuff. I think it feels definitely that with the pandemic, the show has kind of had that role to play in sort of responding to that, and lots of people who have worked on the show, past and present, have really responded to that and really kind of stepped up to that, I think, across the year. Yeah, definitely.
Certainly. And I feel like the show hasn't really felt this big for quite a while. Obviously, as you said, like so many past actors getting back involved with the show, not only through the lockdown things, but obviously David Tennant doing a lot more Big Finish stuff. It feels. Well, yeah, exactly. Just about 20,000 Dalek box sets. It just feels that Doctor Who is feeling a lot bigger. You're getting more actors coming back to it, which is certainly nice. Obviously, we had Captain Jack back in the main show, obviously, but yeah, just the general, everything to do with the show, I suppose. Obviously, a lot more actors interacting with it. I feel like lockdown especially certainly brought the community close together, I'd argue. And I feel like, I feel like perhaps after a bit of division, I suppose, in the community, since maybe Series 11 time, I'd say oddly after, the Timeless Children, in quotation marks, broke the fandom, shall we say. I wouldn't actually say it really affected it all too much. I feel like lockdown actually brought the community together in that sense. And yeah, I just feel that Doctor Who, I suppose, has had a pretty good year, because obviously you mentioned the lockdown stuff, Big Finish, Time Lord Victorious as well. It is something that certainly happened this year. And obviously having a series as well, it is just so much more than we got in 2019. And obviously, we're fortunate that Doctor Who actually got round to filming its festive special before lockdown, because obviously most shows didn't have anything, which is why Christmas Day was just so barren in terms of TV. There's just nothing on. But obviously, with Doctor Who, they filmed it in 2019, which is just some ridiculous planning. Obviously, they weren't to know what was going to happen, but well, exactly, because in theory, it probably would have made sense to film it at the beginning of 2020 when you think about it. But the fact that they got it filmed in 2019 is just like, we're so lucky that they managed to get that in the can.
absolutely.
Certainly. But I guess in terms of taking us all the way back to the start of 2020, and 2020 kicked off with Doctor Who as well, because the 1st of January 2020 we got Spyfall, and obviously we hadn't had a series of Doctor Who for a year. What were your thoughts going into Series 12, Richard? Were you wanting anything in particular? Were you excited? Were you not? What were your kind of thoughts going into that?
Gosh, it seems like ages ago now. Really,
it does feel. I mean, it's almost been a year, but this year has felt so long that it feels weird to think that Spyfall was in the same year as what we're in right now.
Absolutely. I guess really, I don't know. I suppose I wasn't really expecting sort of the extent of sort of surprises and shocks that we got, and the way it stepped it up in that sense, and just also the connections to the show's past as well. I mean, I suppose going into it from the trailers, I remember there was a glimpse of the lone Cyberman, and there was sort of hints in the trailers and interviews and stuff that there was going to be a bit more going on for Jodie's Doctor. She was going to get challenged a bit more, but we weren't quite sure what that would entail. And I think really, I remember very well watching Spyfall Part 1 for the first time when it was broadcast, and just really being taken aback by sort of those final few minutes when the Master is revealed. It's such a massive moment. In fact, I might have even said this on the previous episode that we did, I can't remember, but for me, it signalled a sort of shift. It set the tone for this year's series in terms of the connections to the past. I mean, it was just such a shock for me, because after a series without any old monsters or villains or whatever, apart from the Recon Dalek right at the end on New Year's Day 2019, this was sort of the first time that this era had delved into the show's past in such a massive way. I mean, with the Master, that felt so huge, and I don't think it would have felt so huge, actually, if we hadn't had a year without any old monsters, etc., before that. So that is really what I remember from Series 12, just being sort of really pleasantly surprised by that, and sort of overwhelmed by all the additions to the show's lore that came across those 10 episodes.
Yeah. Certainly. I think I was the same. I think you're absolutely right. The Spyfall there did feel like a massive shift in terms of tone, in terms of embracing the show's past, because I think in Resolution, even though there was a Dalek, it was kind of done in a different way. Obviously you had more of the mutant, and the casing itself looked quite different from the previous Dalek casing we had. So even though it was a previous villain in a Dalek, it still felt quite original, quite new, I guess, quite detached, I suppose, from obviously the Capaldi era, the last time we got a Dalek story. But I feel like there was just something that, even though we did have the Dalek in Resolution, Spyfall really felt like that was when they were embracing the past a bit more. I think as well because I hadn't really been looking at any of the rumours. So, I mean, apparently at the time there were rumours that Sash Dhawan might be playing the Master. I never saw those rumours. So I think, especially considering I presume they were going to do something similar to what we got with the John Sim Master and Matt Smith, where they just took Matt Smith's era off and then brought the Master back with Peter Capaldi. I thought we were going to have Jodie Whittaker's era without the Master, especially considering Series 10 had such a focus on the Master as well, with John Sim's Master obviously coming back and Missy. I just did not expect the Master to pop back up again so soon. So when you had that reveal at the end of Spyfall, it was just a complete shock, and it is such a good reveal, I think. I think especially as I don't think the Dalek had that much of an impact, because even though they didn't reveal that it was a Dalek straight away, we all kind of knew that the Daleks were going to be in that. Whereas, or at least with me, I had no idea the Master was going to be in Spyfall. So I was just like, my mind was blown, and Sash Dhawan is so good at the end of Spyfall. And I think as well is because, at least in my opinion, the villains in Series 11 were a bit weak. They certainly were the weak points in my opinion. So to then have Sacha Dhawan give such a good performance, and to have Jodie just look absolutely void of any hope. She's at the end of Spyfall. It's such a good cliffhanger. She just does not know what she's going to have to do. And it's so good. It really does set the tone, because in Series 11, I think, even though there were certainly some tricky situations for the Doctor and the companions, there weren't really any situations where you really thought, then, they're not going to get out of this one. You're always pretty confident that the Doctor would save the day. But I think that was the one cliffhanger, the one moment, I suppose, in Jodie's era where you just thought, I've got, this just feels like a really dire situation. I've got no idea how the Doctor's going to get out of this one. And I think as well that just emphasises the impact of cliffhangers, because obviously in Series 11 we didn't have any cliffhangers, but just like that first cliffhanger back, and just how it just, made everyone go, whoa, it just sent everyone into a frenzy. And I think it just shows like the impact of cliffhangers, especially after a year off, to have such a reveal like that. And I just think Spyfall in general, just for me at least, felt like a big improvement over Series 11. I feel like Jodie herself was improved a lot more. I think certainly, I don't know whether it's her performance. I think it is her performance as well. But I think the writing for Jodie's Doctor, particularly in Series 12, was a big improvement over Series 11. I think one of my criticisms was there just weren't those like morally grey moments for the Doctor, those like darker moments where perhaps the actor gets to show off their like acting chops. There wasn't really like those moments for Jodie in Series 11. There were a couple, but nowhere near as many as other Doctors had in their first series. Whereas in Series 12, obviously in Spyfall straight away, you get to see Jodie in a different situation, and obviously continuing to Spyfall Part 2, she's a lot more darker throughout Series 12, and in Spyfall Part 2, I feel like having that dynamic with the Master, really brought out a different side to her Doctor, a more serious side to her Doctor, which I really appreciated. And after not really connecting with her Doctor in Series 11, I feel like I actually began to enjoy Jodie in Series 12, which was certainly good. I feel like Spyfall as a whole was just a massive improvement, and obviously the villains was a big problem for me in Series 11. Instantly with Sacha Dhawan's Master, that's fixed. And even the Kasavin I thought seemed pretty menacing in Spyfall Part 1. That instantly I thought those feel like very threatening antagonists. And, it doesn't really go anywhere, but that whole idea when they say they're like mocking their form and stuff, I think that's quite cool. And yeah, they're just kind of, you can't really pin down the Kasavin because they're just like shadows of light, I suppose. Figures of light. In a sense, they could have done more with the Kasavin, but I think, especially in Spyfall Part 1, they are pretty menacing. So the villains, and actually Daniel Barton as well, I thought he was pretty good in Spyfall. So even like that first episode back, the villains for me were a big improvement. Jodie herself was a big improvement. And the companions I thought were improved as well, because they split up the companions, which was my big thing in Series 11. I don't feel as if they split up the companions enough, because obviously when you have a massive TARDIS team, if you keep them all together, the characters aren't really going to flourish. So when you split them up, obviously Graham goes with the Doctor to meet O, Yaz and Ryan go to see Daniel Barton. It really allows those characters to flourish more. So I think that even Spyfall Part 1, I think after Series 11 left me a bit cold. I think, Spyfall instantly just made me more enthusiastic about this era, because it almost kind of ticked off every complaint I had with Series 11, and it just like, well, yeah, it was such a big improvement, and I think that certainly made me a lot more excited for Series 12.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree. I think, obviously Jodie's got that first year under her belt, and Chibnall as well, so they're able to do different things with that, and they're more confident, I think, with the character of the Doctor, and where you can take that character. After she's played it for a year, obviously there are different things you can do once you've got that under your belt, I think. And I think you're definitely right that the way that the fam dynamic is sort of played around with in Series 12 is interesting. I mean, the thing that sticks out for me a lot is what you get a lot more of, definitely in Series 12, is the Doctor being completely alone and separate from the three companions. If you think about things like the play at the start of Spyfall Part 2, or when the companions are with Jack in Fugitive with the Jadoon, or in the Timeless Children, they sort of have to sort of prove themselves a bit more, I suppose, and then the Doctor as well, because Jodie's an actress, and the 13th Doctor as a Doctor, they're both quite dependent on that team of people and having people to bounce off, and so it's very interesting when you take that character and you put them into these scenarios where they're completely alone, they can't do that, but yet they've still got to save the day. And obviously, we saw that across Series 12 when, for instance, she was alone in the Kasavin plane, and when she was alone in Fugitive of the Jadoon, obviously finding out about the Ruth Doctor. When she was alone in Can You Hear Me, when she's alone in the TARDIS and she's like, oh, what do I do now? Now I'm by myself. How do I face up to that? What does that mean for me? And then obviously in the finale as well, and ultimately when she goes to prison at the end of the TARDIS.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose when you think about it, I'd never thought of this before, but you've kind of brought this to my attention, that Series 12, I guess, is leading to Revolution of the Daleks. Revolution of the Daleks, I suppose, is like a culmination of what you were saying. The companions have to, fend for themselves on their own, and the Doctor is also alone in a completely new situation. I suppose in that sense it's quite similar to Spyfall. In the sense that the companions are left on Earth, the Doctor's in, a setting unfamiliar to her. But obviously I presume the difference is whereas in Spyfall, the companions were bailed out by the Doctor at the last second, I presume that ultimately that won't happen in Revolution of the Daleks, and perhaps that could be the downfall of maybe could lead to the death of one of the companions. Maybe the fact that they can't be bailed out by the Doctor, maybe, I don't know, but it's certainly an interesting point that you brought up, because I never really thought of that or made those connections, but there certainly is something thematic about, the Doctor and companions being on their own quite a lot throughout the series, and then obviously the biggest element of that, what it's all leading to, being Revolution of the Daleks. That's certainly an interesting thing that I never spotted before.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely right. And I mean, in a similar way to how Resolution was sort of a code of Series 11 and tied up a lot of stuff that was sort of left hanging after the finale of Series 11. Yeah. Stuff like Ryan's dad, which hadn't been resolved. Things like that, which were still left hanging, were brought up again, and Resolution was sort of the truer finale to that run of episodes. And in a similar way, I'm expecting Revolution to do a similar thing. I mean, obviously, with it being Ryan and Graham's last episode, there's going to be a certain sense of closure there. But yeah, I think I am expecting those things, of the Doctor being alone and the companions being alone, to be brought to a head. Definitely. But as to how that will happen, time will tell, I suppose. A couple of days to go. Yeah Certainly.
Yeah, I think, as you said, Series 12, some interesting thematic stuff there, and it's certainly, I think it improved on Series 11, at least in my opinion, and played around with those dynamics. Played around with the characterization of the Doctor, played around with the companions and how you structure them in a story. And I think it's rather odd, because at least I wasn't a big fan of the Timeless Child reveal, but I find it odd that that whereas perhaps in the past that may have made me feel really sour about the series and really made me be turned off Doctor Who, at least for a little bit, but in this instance it really didn't actually, and I think that's probably just down to the rest of Series 12 really, that regardless of that reveal, I think it did certainly improve on so much that I don't think that really ruined the series for me in any way. Even though, you know, Series 12, I mean, it's nowhere near one of the best series, at least in my opinion. But I feel like it certainly improved on a lot of stuff. And whereas after the Timeless Child reveal, I might have said, well, it's only going to go downhill from here. I think that, at least for me, that there were marked improvements in Series 12. It felt like Chris Chibnall listened to the criticisms of Series 11. Even though he says he doesn't read reviews, it did feel like he'd really listened to the criticism and thought, yeah, I'm going to improve on this. So I guess in that sense, even if we do get more of the Timeless Child idea, which I'm not a big fan of, I'm pretty sure that Chris Chibnall will improve on perhaps the things that weren't so good about Series 12, and that does give me hope for Series 13, because obviously he listened to the criticisms of Series 11, he'll probably listen to the criticisms of Series 12, and then Series 13 will be even better, which, you know, we can only hope that Series 13 is very good. Obviously the filming's underway at the moment, but yeah, I think that if there wasn't any improvement in Series 12, then I wouldn't have been very optimistic for Series 13. But, you know, judging by what we said, the improvements made in Series 12 from Series 11, I think there will certainly be more improvements in Series 13, and I think that's certainly a reason to be optimistic for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a show where I think Stephen Moffat once said, you know, you can never stand still, you can never do the same thing.
Yeah.
So each season kind of has to have a different job to do, and obviously with Series 11, it was kind of that soft reboot thing. And I think that was fine for then, but then obviously, you know, with Series 12 and subsequent series, obviously you're wanting to up the game, you're wanting to shift things around a bit and shake things up, you know, so whether it be through a couple of two-parters, whether it be through bringing back some old villains, or you know, with Series 13 coming up, you know, shaking up the dynamic in the TARDIS, you know, having just the Doctor and Yaz. I mean, that's something that I'm really looking forward to seeing more of. You know, I think, I mean, it's joked about, but I think Yaz does have a lot of potential and is perhaps a bit underrated. I think there's a lot that kind of is going on behind, not so much behind the scenes, but, you know, in Series 11 and 12 that we don't necessarily pick up on, or things about her and about her character, and she's sort of, out of the three of them, I think she's the closest to the Doctor. She's the one who kind of wants to be like the Doctor the most, has that ambition, maybe not quite so much as Graham and Ryan, who are just kind of comfortable playing the sort of companion roles a bit more. So that's something that I'm definitely interested to see more of, and I think as well having a companion like Yaz, it's reminiscent of stuff from the classic era, like Jamie or Tegan, who's the second and fifth Doctors respectively, you know, but were there for the majority of their era. I mean, Jamie was there for every episode apart from Pat Troughton's first one, and Tegan is in a similar boat apart from the last couple of Peter Davison stories. So I'm definitely looking forward to that, and sort of, depending on what happens to Ryan and Graham, sort of seeing either, I mean, if they stay alive, seeing them kind of crop up again, maybe, to supplement that team of the Doctor and Yaz in Series 13, or perhaps from future seasons, or if they die or whatever, or get left behind or trapped somewhere for whatever reason, sort of seeing how that legacy will play on, how it will affect the Doctor and Yaz, and just how their relationship will change or develop as a consequence of it just being them in the TARDIS and them having lost these two people, they've travelled with for 2 years.
Yeah, certainly. I think it would be interesting if they do, or one of them does die, to see perhaps, because obviously we've been seeing that Yaz has been getting a lot more reckless in Series 12, as you said, becoming more like the Doctor. And obviously the Doctor hasn't really commented on her behaviour all too much, But if they do die, how would the Doctor then react to Yaz's recklessness? Would Yaz's course change? Or if she continued on that course, would the Doctor then perhaps, you know, be a bit cold to Yaz and not really like Yaz's recklessness because of what happened? She may feel like a failure, for example, if Ryan or Graham dies, and then may try and stop Yaz from going on that path. And I think that would be certainly interesting to have maybe a less joyful 13 grieving the loss of the companions with a lot of guilt, and have Yaz perhaps like an eager, more reckless companion, and perhaps to have them at odds really, because while Yaz is quite reckless, the Doctor, having seen what could potentially happen to obviously either Ryan or Graham, then that could make for an interesting dynamic, because the Doctor's, I guess, sort of encouraged Yaz's behaviour, her reckless behaviour, but obviously if one of the other companions was to die or something horrible was to happen to them, then obviously the Doctor's opinions on Yaz's character development would be different, I suppose.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I mean, thinking how it could affect the Doctor going forwards if sort of there is a sort of I don't know, kind of spontaneous end to their adventures together. I mean, I don't suppose it will just be as easy as sort of Graham deciding to stay behind, or Ryan, and obviously with the two of them being so sort of, you know, connected to each other. I mean, I don't know, will something happen to one of them that then forces the other to change their mind? And how will that affect the dogs? I mean, I suppose there will be some element of that going forward. I don't see it being as simple and happy and easy as them just deciding to stay behind and it being, you know, like that, because they're such a close team of four, you know, that they need each other. And so, that'll definitely be interesting to see. But as well, you know, in terms of the Doctor and Yaz, I mean, I can kind of see that developing into a sort of best friend relationship, perhaps sort of akin to you know, Sarah Jane or Clara or Rose or something. I can see them becoming really good friends. But yeah, I definitely think if somehow there is that sort of tinge of grief or sadness going forwards, that will definitely add an interesting sort of dramatic element to that relationship. I mean, I don't know how they're going to balance it in the special, you know, in Revolution, because obviously, I mean, I have read a couple of the preview reviews for the story, and they kind of say, oh, you know, it's a bittersweet end. It's perhaps not as jolly or cheery a special as previous sort of festive or Christmas specials. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of balance that, because I suppose for the sake of narrative and drama, you kind of want to have a really dramatic, really sort of horrible, bittersweet ending for these characters, but also you don't want everyone to be kind of really distraught and sort of completely devastated. So I'm really interested to see how they balance that out, to be honest. I mean, someone recently pointed out on Twitter that the last time that Chris Chibnall had to write out two characters was in Torchwood in Exit Wounds in Series 2. And we all know how that went. Well, and that is a pretty acclaimed story, and especially compared to the Series 1 finale. I think general consensus is that it's a lot better and a lot more impactful. So, I mean, that's been a massive tangent about Ryan Graham, but and Yaz, but it'll be really interesting to see how it goes. And I suppose with just a couple more days until this story goes out, I mean, this is our last chance to really speculate.
Well, yes, certainly.
Ever, really. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think that what you said about, obviously, the bittersweet, it could have quite a devastating ending, shall we say. Which would certainly be interesting if it almost ended on another cliffhanger where you're like, where the hell do they go from here? I think that would be interesting, certainly. Also, depending on how long it takes for Series 13 to come out, it'd certainly be interesting what kind of note they end on, because obviously with Resolution, it didn't really end on any sort of cliffhanger. But obviously, I think Revolution may be different. Who knows? But I think certainly I was like, if there was a death in Revolution, I would like that to have some sort of impact on the Doctor's character, because I think it would be pretty jarring, shall we say, if someone died in Revolution, and then the first episode of Series 13, Jodie's just her usual bubbly self. I think it would be quite jarring. So I think it would be nice to have that perhaps impact her. And I think as well, we've seen Jodie feel, the 13th Doctor, shall I say, feel as if she's got everything on her shoulders. Obviously, you've got that moment in The Haunting of Lydia Dutty where she essentially says that, it's all up to her, and that, and obviously you've got, in The Timeless Children, she almost feels that she's going to seal the companions' fates, leaving them behind. So, I think, naturally, if a companion did die, that would seemingly, it naturally would weigh on her shoulders quite a lot in terms of the characterization that we've been given so far. It's just obviously just a case if they naturally follow through with that, or they just kind of ignore it. But I think certainly it would be nice to have that impact her character, because I'd certainly enjoy seeing... no, I wouldn't say enjoy it, because that makes me sound really morbid, but because I was watching The Snowman the other day in my marathon, and it's just interesting to see obviously the exits of Amy and Rory and how that affects obviously the 11th Doctor in that story. And I think it would just be interesting to see how that would affect Jodie, because I always find that quite interesting. And obviously when you're watching The Snowman, obviously that does affect the 11th Doctor quite a lot in that story, but obviously I think there's almost some untapped potential there, because whereas the death of the other Clara could all of a sudden make him go even further down the rabbit hole, like he lost Amy and Rory, he went into self-imposed exile, then obviously he's almost like has his hope reinstilled with Clara, then she dies. What would that do to the 11th Doctor after that? All that guilt on his shoulders, but then ultimately that story ends on a more cheerful note when he realises that Clara's still alive out there, and then he doesn't really bring up the exits of Amy and Rory again, or it doesn't really impact him. But I think that it would certainly be interesting to have maybe the exits of Ryan and Graham. Whether that is a death or not, we can only speculate, but to see whatever that may be really impact Jodie for multiple stories, maybe that's maybe like an ongoing character arc for her throughout Series 13, is for her to get over that grief or over that guilt. I think that would certainly be quite interesting.
Yeah, I'd absolutely like to see that kind of bubbling under the surface. I mean, I suppose it's difficult in a way that if Series 13 is your first series, I mean, thinking about it on the part of the writer, if they're trying to make it accessible for new viewers and etc., you don't want to make the Doctor look too sort of mournful, I suppose, or grumpy or whatever, or angry. I mean, I suppose I can probably see her reacting in more of a mournful way than an angry way, a la sort of, I don't know, the 12th Doctor and Hellbent or whatever. I can, and maybe internalising it a bit, maybe the way that sort of she and Yaz articulate that to each other and sort of help each other heal, perhaps, in Series 13. Maybe that'll be a thing. It was interesting as well when you were saying there about, those moments in The Haunting of Villa Diodati and then in essentially The Cybermen, where the Doctor says, how reckless she's been, and it's easy to forget, I think, how many sort of moments like that there were across Series 12, where there were things which we thought at the time sort of weren't being paid off, because we got to the end of the time as children, and it was kind of like we'd run out of time. I remember thinking, one of the things I thought when I first watched the story is how little time the Doctor and her companions spend together, especially in that story, and there's not necessarily sort of closure to companion stories that's left open, that there's still more to come, and obviously that's in the special that we just had to wait a long time for that. So at the time we knew it was coming, sort of, but we, nevertheless it still felt a bit unresolved. And then there's other stuff as well, like if you look at Can You Hear Me, where Ryan feels guilty about leaving Tibbo behind, his friend, and there's to Yaz at the end of that story, how much longer are we going to keep doing this? Something like that. He feels guilty about leaving his friends behind on Earth. You kind of get the sense that he's gearing up to perhaps leave of his own volition, and obviously that's not something that happens in Time's Children, but I suppose could happen in Revolution, because the interesting thing is, I suppose, that for them as well as us, it's been many months. I think it's been 10 months for them in the show, and so I guess it's conceivable that stuff has changed, circumstances for Graham, Ryan and Yaz. Maybe, I don't know, I mean, one sort of rumour that's going, well, it's been going around a long time, even since Series 11 was broadcast, but, could Graham's cancer have returned? Perhaps? We've seen him scared of that in Series 12. So that's something that could have happened. Ryan could have, become more rooted on Earth, become more comfortable living on Earth, become less sort of needy in terms of needing the Doctor, stand on his own 2 feet a bit more. I mean, obviously with Yaz, we know that out of the 3 of them, she's the most obsessed with the Doctor. She's the one who's going to end up travelling with her in Series 13. But yeah, I mean, I suppose that there's that to Graham and Ryan's stories as well to think about, and yeah, the Doctor feeling that she's being reckless, and sort of regretting that she's been reckless, and yeah, will that kind of come to a head with the companions being put in danger and possibly dying? Maybe. I don't know. I suppose it's whether they kind of go for something like that, or like in terms of kind of big moment, big death, big sacrifice or something, or something more small scale, something more mundane. Like Graham's cancer returning, and he decides to stay behind, or he has to stay behind, because he's not well enough to continue or whatever. And Ryan deciding to stay with him. I mean, maybe something like that. I don't know. Or maybe,
I hadn't thought of that, but that's actually quite an interesting idea.
Maybe it could kind of be a big moment if it's a death, or it kind of could be a smaller, more mundane thing, completely disconnected to the aliens and the sci-fi elements. Yeah.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting, and it is interesting to see what they'll do with it, because, well, I suppose, obviously we haven't had a proper companion departure in the Jodie Whittaker era. Obviously we had Grace, but she wasn't really a companion, so it will certainly be interesting to see what they do with that. And especially you mentioned the mundane stuff. I remember watching The Woman Who Fell to Earth, and just like Grace's death, just how rooted in reality that felt with the funeral and stuff. I don't really feel as if we had that with a death before. Particularly in the revived series, I suppose, because even though we had we had deaths? Not really, I suppose, but it didn't really feel like there had been a death that just felt so real and grounded. So, looking at that, I suppose it would certainly be interesting to see how Chibnall really deals with that. If someone does die, will their death be rooted in reality, or will they be, for example, Ryan exterminated with a Dalek? But then will we see the real life ramifications of that at the end? And certainly it would be interesting to see if they did maybe do a funeral scene, to see how they would parallel that. Yes. Maybe they could parallel that directly with Grace's death scene, with maybe Graham doing a speech yet again. Or something like that. I don't know, but yeah, it would certainly be interesting to see how they handle it. And obviously, because we haven't seen Chibnall handle a proper companion departure thus far, it will certainly be interesting to see how he really deals with that. And you raised a good point about how you thought a lot of things hadn't been resolved in Series 12, but then obviously we've got Revolution of the Daleks, because I felt like a lot of things just were kind of being ignored. Yaz's recklessness didn't really come to a head that much at the end of Series 12. I kind of thought she was going to, at the end of the Timeless Children, when the Doctor's going to press the button, I thought it was going to be Yaz who was going to run in to kind of end her kind of arc, I suppose, of being reckless. And because obviously you get the scene where Graham says that stuff about Yaz being a wonderful person. Obviously that kind of set. I was just kind of like, she's clearly going to die, but obviously she didn't.
On the way out.
But yeah, so I thought a lot of that, like those arcs, hadn't really been fulfilled, I suppose. The companions didn't do much in the Timeless Children. I suppose the Doctor herself as well doesn't really do much in the Timeless Children. In the middle part, I suppose it's more of the Master, and he's kind of doing stuff with Ashad and stuff. He kind of takes control, I suppose, while the other parties are doing their own thing. So I think at the time I kind of felt a bit cheated by the Timeless Children being the finale, because it didn't really fulfill the arcs that I feel like had been set up in Series 12. But obviously I had kind of been neglecting, I think because Series 12 was so early on in the year, obviously compared to when Revolution of the Daleks was being released, that I suppose these New Year's specials are more like kind of coders to the series rather than their own standalone thing, because obviously you said Resolution kind of pays off a lot of those arcs in Series 11, and I presume Revolution will do the same. That if the arcs haven't quite been wrapped up in a series, that perhaps we shouldn't almost write it off as saying that arc hasn't been fulfilled, because we do almost have another episode. It's certainly interesting to see it as, I feel like these festive specials do feel more like another episode of that series rather than a special in its own right. It's almost like a finale after a finale, I suppose. I feel like whereas the Timeless Children was fulfilling the narrative arc of Series 12, Revolution of the Daleks will be the true finale in terms of the character arcs in Series 12.
Yeah, and actually the more I think about it, the more I like that, I think. I mean, I know at the time a lot of people, including myself, sort of found the Battle of Ranskor of Kolos a bit underwhelming. I mean, not necessarily because of anything about the episode itself, but just because it seemed quite unremarkable compared to previous big-scale, more epic finales. And obviously stuff was left hanging. But yeah, actually, the more I think about it, it's quite nice to have that sort of the first finale, at the end of the series, and then your second finale with the special. But going back to Grace's death as well, I mean, I loved that about Series 11. I loved the way that Graham's grief was focused upon, and I suppose for me the real striking thing about that death is that it takes place right at the start of the series, and also it's kind of juxtaposed with this moment of the Doctor sort of finding herself again, saying to Tim Shah, "I'm the Doctor," and really realising who she is and coming into herself. And so we've got that moment that's meant to be, and has historically been in previous sort of post-generation stories, very triumphant. And then actually, after that's happened, and after Tim Shaw has been defeated, and after she's saved the day, what we then see is the death of a loved one, of these new lead characters, and it's sort of, I think it completely it changes the tone there and does something really exciting and something that we've not seen before. I mean, you'd usually expect the death of a sort of much loved character or a lead character to come at the end of the series, but what The Woman Who Fell to Earth does is put it at the start, and it sort of suggests this connection, I think, to regeneration, to the Doctor, to this whole idea, which I sort of see across the era of this sort of articulation between the past and the present, this relationship between the past and the present, and it's there in the historicals as well. I think this idea of sort of honouring the past, not sort of forgetting the past, not sort of forgetting the atrocities of the past, or the things about the past that are sort of perhaps not so desirable and not so so comforting to remember, but that nevertheless must be thought about and reevaluated. And of course, it connects as well to sort of the Doctor's position in the Timeless Children when she has to sort of face her own past in ways that she's not before. So that for me is a sort of perhaps the recurring theme of the Chibnall era, and I think to consider that in relation to Graham and Ryan, then yes, assuming that Revolution of the Daleks stays true to that and stays consistent to that, there definitely will be some fallout to that in Series 13, I think. I mean, regardless of whether Graham and Ryan die or not, their legacy will live on and hopefully be a big part of the story going forward, even if it just kind of comes up again in an episode or two, or something that is not really mentioned much. But yeah, like the more I think about it, the more I like that idea of the Doctor and Yaz sort of being able to heal each other
certainly,
and remember those characters. It's really interesting to speculate about what they're going to do with that. Yeah, certainly.
And I think, obviously, presumably that will play a big role in Series 13. But also, I feel as if, obviously, if we're thinking about maybe what perhaps the stuff we're going to get in Series 13 beyond that, I suppose, obviously, we've got the lingering thread of the Doctor in prison, and why is she in prison? And I think it would be a bit of a letdown if the Doctor's just put in prison for just like a petty reason, and it's only there as a device to get her out of Revolution of the Daleks. I feel as if she's been put into prison for a reason, and perhaps if she does get out of prison, she presumably will in Revolution of the Daleks, whether that's in the middle of the story or, like many are speculating, right at the end. I feel like certainly the reason she's in prison wouldn't... I don't know, it could just be for a small reason, but I feel like that would feel quite cheap if it's purely used as a mechanism to just get her out of the story. I feel as if the reason she's in prison must have some ramifications onto Series 13, and perhaps that will set up something that could be explored later down the line.
Well, yeah, I suppose it's the Timeless Child thing. It's the fugitive Doctor. I mean, when we saw in Fugitive of the Judoon that the Judoon and the Time Lords were after the Doctor, wanted to kind of capture her, and then sort of failed to do so. I suppose actually looking back, it was inevitable that would come back to bite the character on the bum. I mean, obviously it's interesting that the Judoon have kind of come back so much later in the Doctor's time stream. You know, they're after the fugitive Doctor, assuming she's a pre-Hartnell Doctor. That they must have messed up the timeline somehow to end up with such a later incarnation. But nevertheless, I suppose that's definitely connected to that arc and to what the Doctor did in her Timeless Child days, as part of the division, what that was all about, or I don't know, I mean, because the Judoon were employed by the Time Lords, weren't they, to capture her, so maybe it's for crimes against the Time Lords, some way in which she rebelled against them or betrayed them. I don't know, but that'll definitely be interesting going forward. I mean, you're right. I think that it would be a shame for that not to lead anywhere further. And I mean, certainly the groundwork is there for that to become a bigger thing. You know, we've got the division, we've got Judoon. It's all been set up, and so hopefully Revolution acknowledges that. And definitely going forward, I want to see more of the division. I thought they were a really cool idea. I want to sort of learn more about what the Doctor got up to in these lives that she has no recollection of, and what that means. I mean, I'm sure I've said somewhere else before or thought or whatever that it'll be interesting to see how they do that, because obviously these Time Lords, these characters, these events, they all took place in sort of prehistory Gallifrey, ages ago, aeons ago. and obviously with Gallifrey now being destroyed again, how are they going to get Time Lord characters? Assuming that we do get confrontation between Doctor and Time Lord characters, how will that work? I'm not quite sure yet, but or unless it just involves time travel and kind of going back to the early days of Gallifrey somehow. But also as well, it's interesting. I mean, there was a quote recently from Chibnall about Series 13, I think, about, you know, the people that the Doctor and Yaz are going to meet, or where they're heading, and who they're going to encounter ultimately. And, you know, to me, that sort of suggested Tecteun, perhaps. You know, but perhaps the Doctor is going to have to come to terms with and come face to face with her adopted mother, adoptee, or whatever the right version of that is, isn't it? Because the Doctor was adopted by Tecteun, but you get the idea. Foster mother, I suppose.
Yeah,
would be the right term there. But I was kind of thinking about that because it's interesting, because the actor who played that part, I think she's called Solian Baxter or something like that. You know, not to put too fine a point on it, but she's not a celebrated actor. I think she's a folk musician or something, actually, by trade. So, and it was a non-speaking part in that story, obviously. So I was kind of thinking to myself, well, how's that going to work? Because presumably they're not going to bring her back for a speaking role. And then I kind of thought to myself, well, actually, Tecteun, more than any other Time Lord, can regenerate. You know, they could be wearing any face. And what would be really interesting in Series 13, I suppose, would be to see more of that. More of the thing we saw with the Ruth Doctor, more of the thing we saw with the Master, you know, where these Time Lord characters are showing up and the Doctor hasn't got a clue because they're wearing new faces. I just think that would be so epic, you know, if there was a cliffhanger to the finale in Series 13 or something, and it was just this character saying, oh, you know, I'm Tecteun. It would just be absolutely phenomenal, I think. So yeah, there's a lot of potential with the stuff that's been set up, and I suppose it's just whether they kind of use that, and how far and to what extent they kind of do those things, because I suppose it's happened before in the show's past where the stuff we think is going to become really important and really crucial to ongoing storylines and seasons, and it doesn't. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that the signs are pointing in the direction of Chibnall taking these ideas forward, but as to kind of what form they take and which of these guesses and speculations are correct, well, that remains to be seen.
Well, yeah, certainly, and yeah, it's interesting you talking about that, because I suppose the ideas of prehistory Gallifrey and the division aren't ideas that I suppose before now have really appealed to me. I've kind of been someone who's been wanting them to, I suppose, more focus on the present or the future rather than go back to the past. But you speaking about it now, it does certainly have an appeal, and there is certainly some interesting things you could do with it. Obviously, you mentioned Tecteun. That would be quite interesting to see the Doctor encounter Tecteun, and perhaps Tecteun could almost become like not necessarily a recurring foe, but another one of those villains, I suppose, that like a Rassilon or an Omega, another one of those Time Lord foes who you could see in a couple of stories who has a personal connection to the Doctor, like the Master, I suppose. And also, I think it would be interesting, perhaps, because obviously Gallifrey was left in a bit of a weird position in Hellbent, obviously, with, you know, Rassilon going, and it's not really made clear what would happen after that. So it would certainly be interesting to maybe go back and maybe see maybe a younger Rassilon, maybe like gaining power, and to see you know what Rassilon would be like that. I think that would certainly be interesting, because we've seen Rassilon in power, obviously, in the prime of his power when he's just come back, obviously, in the end of time. But I think it would be interesting to see him maybe regaining power, a younger wrestler, and I think that would be quite interesting. And obviously encountering Tecteun as well. And I think what you said about perhaps the reason the Doctor's in prison is she's been mistaken for the fugitive Doctor is quite interesting. I did a video called Pitching Revolution of the Daleks, where I essentially said what I do with Revolution of the Daleks just based on the title itself before we got a trailer or anything, and the story itself is like completely different to what we're actually going to get. But something I said in that was like the Doctor in prison because she's mistaken for the fugitive Doctor. And I think also we obviously spoke, as you said there, and obviously we spoke about certainly like the different character dynamics based on the deaths, I suppose, of Ryan and Graham. It would be certainly interesting if Jodie does encounter the fugitive Doctor again, if they, her being in prison, the mistaken identity is the cost of the deaths of Ryan or Graham, and it was all because they got her mixed up with the fugitive Doctor. How would the 13th Doctor then interact with the fugitive Doctor? Would she, be quite angry towards her? And all that sorts of stuff. She's been quite sympathetic to the fugitive Doctor because obviously she's herself. But obviously, would she then, maybe investigate what the fugitive Doctor was actually doing more with a different lens rather than it's just the Time Lords in the wrong, or maybe she might have more of a balanced lens because she might have perhaps some anger towards the fugitive Doctor, or would she then have more anger towards the Time Lords? It's interesting things, and I really do hope they do capitalise on all this, because I think certainly it would just be an interesting place to take the 13th Doctor. A lot of this character stuff that you could do with her, that I think it would be such a shame if they didn't capitalise on it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess the thing will be whether, because Chibnall has gone on record as saying that Joe Martin isn't coming back. He doesn't have any plans currently to bring her back. Obviously, that could be a lie. I suppose it's whether we actually go back to prehistory Gallifrey somehow and actually meet these characters, or whether it's a bit more subtle than that, or whether the effects of that sort of impact the Doctor's adventures in the present, or whether it's more a case, as you say, of her sort of investigating what happened in the past, like going to a museum or something, and finding traces or records or artifacts of what happened, as opposed to kind of directly sort of interacting with these characters. I think there's definitely more story to be told there. Going back to Tecteun as well, way back in the 13th Doctor's first episode, she speaks about her family and how...
Yeah, she does, actually. That's a good point.
Family were lost, yeah. And family obviously was a big theme in Series 11. Sort of the importance of family in terms of having other people, in terms of sort of the multicultural, multi-gender, sort of inclusive family as well, and sort of family reconciliation has been a big idea in this era as well. Look at Graham and Ryan coming to terms with each other, or Ryan and his dad making up, or I don't know, Eve and Cicero, I think he's called in the the Saranga Conundrum. Those two have their problems, and they're able to put them aside. And then obviously, I think the other big example would be Bella and Kane in Orphan 55. Yeah. It's a recurring idea throughout this era that we've seen with other characters. We've seen it in the lead cast with Graham and Ryan. We've seen it with side characters as well, and it will be interesting to see them run with that for the Doctor. How is the Doctor able to sort of reconcile or not with her foster mother or other... I suppose I could introduce other members of her family. I don't know. I always thought in Series 11 that the payoff to that first line in Norman Who Fell to Earth would be, meeting member of the Doctor's family at the end of the season. And obviously that's not that dissimilar to what we've seen with Tecteon in just a series later. So I don't know. There's definitely a lot of groundwork that's been laid, and it just really is a matter of how much of that is just us sort of reading into things, I suppose. How much of it is intentional, how much of it they're going to run with for Series 13. I mean, with 2 series under their belt, Jodie and Chibnall have all this stuff to play with now. They have all the foundations for some really exciting stories and some really exciting stuff. And it'll just be interesting to see where they go with it, and if they sort of develop these plot strands.
Certainly. And I think it's a testament as well to Series 12 that we can speculate on all these things, on all these hanging plot threads, I suppose, and all these little details, and speak about how and where they could go in the future. Because obviously Series 12 was, in the early half of this year. We're now approaching, obviously, New Year's. It should be either New Year's Eve or New Year's Day when this goes out. I haven't decided yet. Maybe New Year's Eve, because obviously people will be watching the special on New Year's Day. But I think it's just a testament to Series 12 that we can still speak about these things. I think, if I remember rightly, the first podcast we did, you mentioned how, regardless of what you think of the Timeless Child reveal, it certainly got people talking. And I think it is a testament to Series 12 that, there is so much we can speculate on the future of the show, because you think about Series 11 and Resolution, there really wasn't anything we could speak about afterwards, which is why I think 2019 felt like a bit of a dull year in terms of Doctor Who, because there really wasn't anything we could speculate. Series 11 kind of tied it all together. It didn't really leave anything hanging or really set anything up for the future, which is why I think Spyfall, people got such an intense reaction to it, because it was just so much new stuff. That obviously there was no hint that the Master was going to come back, no hint of any of this stuff, because Series 11 just hadn't really left anywhere to set things up, whereas obviously Series 12, it set up so much stuff that obviously we've been speculating on. So I think that's why the fandom itself feels a lot more reinvigorated after Series 12, regardless of such a revolution like the Timeless Child, because there's just so much stuff that it has that people can talk about and speculate about, and I think it certainly it provoked discussion, which is obviously good. Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Series 11 was pretty self-contained. For better or for worse, as you say, it didn't set up things for the future, and Series 12 has definitely been the opposite.
Certainly. So we've spoken a lot about Series 12, obviously, and speculated on Revolution of the Daleks. But I suppose, obviously, as we said, Series 12 kind of set up the rest of the year with obviously all these revelations. It really reinvigorated the fandom, got discussions going, got people talking. And then I suppose it was quite a healthy position. I feel like it left the fandom in quite a healthy position going into that lockdown, which really brought the fandom together. Obviously people were talking, having discussions anyway, and then obviously we get into lockdown, and the fandom just got reinvigorated quite a lot. Obviously, for me, I feel as if I've become much more active and involved in the community. I've made a lot of friends with people and different Doctor Who YouTubers and people in the community who I wouldn't have really spoken to before because of lockdown, and talking to them, and now some people who I consider quite good friends. Obviously, I started the podcast as well to talk to different people and spoke to a lot of people, including yourself, and I feel like the lockdown just brought fandom together, obviously capitulated by the kind of lockdown rewatches, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I mean, I suppose for me, the sort of pretty striking thing, really, and sort of pretty mad thing, pretty bonkers thing, it is the timing of it all. I mean, you know, the Timeless Children was, 10 months ago to the day of, what is going to be Revolution of the Daleks, 1st of January 2021, and I think it was sort of cool that Series 12, all of that was sort of out of the way, or just out of the way. I mean, in terms of the timing, how the timings work, by the time we went into lockdown. And sort of, the proximity of that. I mean, it was only about 3 weeks, I think, between the series ending and then the lockdown beginning. So that is kind of really good accidental timing, I think, in terms of how that happened. I mean, there's so much stuff, I think, in Series 12 that has sort of been given new meaning or new relevance due to the situation we've been in. I mean, we've seen it discussed loads about Revolution of the Daleks and how the Doctor's position in prison mirrors our own, all that sort of accidental stuff, even though the episode was filmed last year. But also other sort of more unexpected stuff. I mean, the whole thing with Data in Spyfall, that whole thing with Daniel Barton and Vor. I mean, we've seen a load of stuff similar to that this year with things like the COVID NHS app and the way data has been used, abused possibly, and the way that impacts our lives, and the way that's sort of so integrated into our lives. That we can just get a phone and scan ourselves in, scan a QR code, and the role that plays. So I think that makes Spyfall look even more timely than perhaps it was when it came out. I mean, I think similarly as well with Orphan 55. At the time and still now, the speech at the end seems clunky to me, in my opinion, and lots of other people as well thought that. And the way that message perhaps could have been integrated better into the episode about climate change and sort of the risks and the sort of urgency of that, I suppose. But actually, the more I think that we think about it and look back on it with time, the less radical it seems. I think the more I can forgive it, at least myself. And I think what's striking about that is that there was a lot of climate change related stuff going on, but particularly at the start of the year. I mean, I can't remember a specific instance, but I remember there being a lot of news about it and a lot of stuff going on, fires and things, and all that sort of, a whole host of stuff. I mean, I'd have to look it up to remember the exact detail, but there was a lot going on. So I think that is relevant in lots of ways. I think as well, with the introduction of the first Black Doctor, obviously that has seemed even more remarkable with the events that followed just a few months after that. But again, that was sort of after the fact. So all these things sort of happened afterwards. And similarly with Can You Hear Me, looking at Thibault, Ryan's friend, locked up alone in his little flats. I mean, that is very similar to how a lot of people have been this year in lockdown. And so, again, I think in terms of the real world issues that the show's exploring, the mental health thing, yes, at the time it might have seemed a bit on the nose, but actually, with the year we've had and the events that followed, all these things have actually seemed spookily prescient, I think, and the timing of those stories has been a really happy accident in many ways, in a way that perhaps sort of something like Series 11 wasn't so much. I mean, there were still real world issues at play there, particularly in the historical stories. or stuff to do with capitalism in Kablam or whatever, and ethics of that, and slightly questionable ethics. But I don't know, if you take a story like The Ghost Monument or the Siranga Conundrum, it doesn't sort of resonate, I suppose, with what's going on socially and culturally in the same way that the majority of Series 12 stories. I mean, I forgot to say that the most obvious example, of course, that we got Praxeus, a story about a virus. I was reading just the other day the recent Doctor Who magazine 2021 yearbook, which is a fabulous publication which has come out. It's got loads of content on Series 12, so if you're a fan of the current era of Doctor Who, it's a great thing to look at. And the writer of that, I can't remember exactly who it is off the top of my head, but the writer of the article about Praxeus says, that points out how great it is. Obviously, it's an accident, but what a serendipitous accident it is that in that story, the Doctor invents a vaccine. It's just such a timely story in so many ways. I mean, obviously, it's not exactly the same, though, to our situation now. And obviously, you've got to be careful about the comparisons you draw, and you want to be sensitive. But nevertheless, I think the point that article makes is it's really cool that that story ends with the Doctor creating a vaccine and just what that character symbolises. So. Yeah, I'd say that a lot of those Series 12 stories have resonated with stuff going on in the world, particularly across the lockdown period, which obviously was subsequent to Series 12. But I just find that spooky the way that's worked. All this stuff that's happened just after the series was broadcast. It's kind of made you look at those stories perhaps in a slightly different light. Yeah.
Certainly. And, it is strange, isn't it, how much of Series 12, I suppose, can be almost recontextualised with what's happened this year, almost scaringly. So, obviously, Praxeus being the obvious one, a virus breaking out at different places all across the world, a very global story. Then, obviously, you mentioned, Tibbo and Can You Hear Me and the mental health stuff. And all those kind of links. It is scaringly weird how much that can be recontextualized, and how much of that then played a big part in the rest of the year after those episodes were transmitted. It's almost as if it was all planned out. Conspiracy theory, Chris Chibnall created coronavirus. I know a lot of people would probably like to blame him for that if they could. But no, it is interesting how that can be recontextualized, and it is certainly strange. And I'd almost feel as if maybe, Praxeus, for example, would probably be too on the nose. But I'd almost say that perhaps Series 12 would have been more of a success if it was actually released maybe now, after all this stuff has happened. Maybe more people would perhaps value it, because I've kind of as much as I've praised Series 12 for what it sets up and how it improves upon the characters, in terms of a lot of the stories, I've kind of like dismissed as a bit throwaway. I haven't really returned to Series 12. I don't think since it aired, really, in terms of watching episodes. But you speaking about this now, and obviously thinking about all the different links. I think certainly a lot of people will probably value it a lot more, and I think it would probably get a lot more recognition and a lot of credit for a lot of its social commentary on certain things like mental health and racism and viruses, pollution, all these kind of things. I feel like these issues would probably, that the episodes would get a lot more credit for how it tackles those issues if it was released now, rather than perhaps before all these things, because obviously, as I mentioned, Praxeus, I think, would probably be deemed as a bit disrespectful if it was to be released now. But I think all the other episodes, I feel like their portrayals of certain things, I feel as if, we'd probably get more recognition now. Now, a lot of these issues have really been brought to the forefront due to, obviously, the pandemic and many other things that have happened across 2020.
Yeah, maybe. I think always looking back on a series or episodes or whatever it may be, Doctor Who or other media or whatever, sort of after the fact, a few months on, it is always really interesting. And yeah, I think definitely with the kind of social issues and things, at the time there can be backlash, or at the time it can seem a bit clunky or whatever, but sort of increasingly, as time goes on, I think those things do generally they do seem less less sort of radical to say, and more sort of commonsensical, things that are just sort of ubiquitous and completely relevant, but just maybe when you're kind of in the thick of it, living through that time, it's not as easy to kind of notice that connection. Obviously, as I said, as you kind of commented on, all these things that we've talked about came afterwards, but I obviously, they couldn't have been foreseen. It's definitely an interesting one to think about.
Well, certainly, and it is odd because going into this podcast, I never thought, because I hadn't really thought of this before, but I suppose it is weird that Series 12, the series that aired in 2020, tackles and could kind of sum up a lot of things that have happened in 2020. Series 12, the 2020 series, is kind of like a representation of the year itself before it happened, which is very, very strange. Almost time travel. Ironically, right. It is certainly very strange, and it is very weird because it's something other than the Praxeus connection, which I saw you made a long time ago at the start of lockdown, and a few others made. But other than that, I really hadn't thought of this too much. But now you've brought it to my attention, and it is very strange that Series 12 is so purely a product of its year before it even happened.
Yes.
It is very strange, and obviously the combination of that is going to be in Revolution of the Daleks, and whether they'll actually somehow with some trickery reference some other 2020 events, who knows, but I think that, I am optimistic for Revolution of the Daleks. I feel like the year we've had in terms of Doctor Who, there were certainly drawbacks to Series 12, but I feel like there were a lot of positives to take from that. It did set some interesting things up, it did improve on stuff. Then obviously what we've gotten since with obviously the lockdown rewatches and just the fandom in general coming close together, I feel like that a combination of that's all culminated in me being quite optimistic for Revolution of the Daleks, and I am certainly looking forward to it. And obviously we spoke about obviously the potential companion exits and all of the ways that could be handled and all the potential ramifications. But I suppose detaching us from that, in terms of elsewhere in Revolution of the Daleks, what kind of things are you hoping for or looking forward to?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Obviously the stuff that's already been announced, and there's a lot of it. So I don't know. Seeing Captain Jack back would be an obvious one. Seeing Jack Robertson back, and I'm excited for that.
Well, I can tell, judging by your Twitter account. Yeah, exactly. Budget Trump.
Budget Trump. I mean, I have to say, actually, Arachnids in the UK is an episode that I've gone back to loads recently. It might not be the best Doctor episode objectively by any stretch, but it's a real comfort episode for me, I think. there's a lot to love about it. A lot of fun stuff about that episode, but that's a lot of tangent there. So the two Jacks, looking very much forward to seeing them. I mean, obviously, Doctor, how she escapes from prison, the companions, how Graham and Ryan fare, what happens to them, and sort of what elements of their story are paid off. So, I mean, I'm not the first person to say stuff like this, but whether or not we might see Ryan's YouTube channel again, or him learning to ride his bike. Whether, as I've already said, we might see him to do with Graham's cancer. Whether somehow we might see Grace again. I mean, I'd be totally up for that. I love Sharon D. Clarke; she's amazing. Whether we see her as a ghost or like in heaven with Graham or something, or I don't know, or whether she just gets referenced again. I'm expecting something. I think they will reference her somehow. And that's pretty much the sort of the guest characters as well. We've got a new Prime Minister and a scientist guy called Leo. Although, from what I've read of reviews and stuff, I'm not sure how big a part they're going to play. Particularly the Prime Minister character. I think she's called Jo Patterson. I'm not sure how big a role she's going to play. I mean, there's so much that we know about the story already. And I haven't even mentioned the Daleks, of course. The new Daleks. But I suppose as well, what I'm secretly hoping for, and if it doesn't happen, then it's not the end of the world by any means. But what I'm secretly hoping for is another sort of shock or surprise, or multiple surprises. And I suppose they could arise from the characters and situations and events that we already know about, whether it's a surprising element to what happens to Graham and Ryan that no one could have seen coming. They could arise from that, or other unannounced characters, perhaps in the vein of Sacha Dhawan's Master. I mean, I've got to be careful here because I don't want to get my hopes up too much, but to see a big reveal or a character or actor or whatever that has been kept is a complete surprise. Dare I say Davros?
I know you've been talking about that a fair bit on Twitter, and I mean, he could be getting our hopes up, but it would be so good to just see Davros. It would be so good.
Even just to see him briefly, I mean, because with the amount this story has got to do, something has got to give. Not everything is going to get equal screen time, and particularly with the emphasis on Graham and Ryan's departure, I think that's what the reviews seem to imply, that the end of the episode is very much about that and about that only. So you don't want too many distractions, but something like that, or even just, I mean, I would find it strange if those bronze Daleks didn't have some kind of leader. So even if it's just seeing the Red Supreme Dalek again, that would be cool. Or some new leader Dalek, be it some kind of variation of the Supreme or Emperor or something, someone. I find it difficult to sort of imagine that there won't be some sort of big boss bad like that, whether that's Davros or a Supreme Dalek. I don't know. I mean, because we have got two types of Dalek in this story already. We've got Robertson, who's a villain. So, there's a lot to fit in. But I think deep down, if I was being totally honest, I am hoping for surprises and shocks. I mean, I think whatever happens, whatever happens to Graham and Ryan will be surprising and shocking in some way, even if it's just really low key. I mean, we've been told it's emotional and bittersweet, so that is something not to look forward to, but to look forward to seeing how that plays out, and how upsetting and devastating that may be. Yeah.
Well, yeah, certainly. I think you obviously raise an interesting point about Davros, because it would be so good to see him again. We obviously haven't seen Davros in 5 years. It would be really interesting to see how they played it. Obviously, you said the episode's doing so much that perhaps we're getting our hopes up. But an idea I just thought of just a second ago was if maybe Davros was a fellow inmate of the Doctors in prison. Would be quite interesting,
wow.
And that could maybe connect the Doctor more to the Dalek plot, because perhaps the Bronze Daleks, led by the Supreme, betrayed Davros. He's in prison, and maybe the Doctor might need to make an uneasy alliance with Davros to break out. And then once they break out, and maybe Davros, seeing the opportunity to see these new Daleks that the humans have created with no leader, could say, well, you know, these could be loyal to me, and now the Doctor's technically allowed him to escape, then he could take control of these new Daleks, maybe after they've destroyed the Bronze Daleks that have, you know, obviously there's going to be some sort of civil war there, we can only assume. Or maybe Davros may take control of that Dalek, this new Dalek army to destroy the Bronze Daleks, and maybe if Davros took charge of the new Daleks and maybe they exterminated Ryan or Graham, maybe that could put even more guilt on the Doctor, because she technically helped Davros to escape, because they would, you know, form an uneasy alliance to both get out. I think that would certainly be interesting. I mean, I doubt they'll do anything like that, because Davros would have to feature prominently in the story, and I just don't feel like they'd throw that in there like at the start. But it would be so crazy if they did that. But, you know, even negating that story idea that I'm actually pretty proud of, having just thought of that like 2 seconds ago. Just general, in any capacity, it would be so cool to see Davros back. And I think certainly I listened to the Big Finish story, just simply titled Davros, the other day. I don't know if you've listened to it, but it's a really it's a
few years ago, I think. I remember it being pretty good.
Yeah, it's such a good exploration into like the character of Davros and his dynamic with the Doctor, and I think it really gave me like a whole new appreciation for Davros, and really made me want to see more stories with him and the Doctor, but also to see that relationship explored, because they kind of touched on it a bit in The Magician's Apprentice, which is familiar, but I think it would be really cool to then maybe have Davros maybe make an appearance in Revolution of the Daleks, and maybe then him to have a bigger capacity in maybe Series 13 after being like almost re-established slightly in Revolution. I think that'd be quite interesting.
Maybe. I mean, do you know that idea that the Doctor is saved not by Jack or the companions, but actually by, you know, the Daleks? That's a really interesting idea. And not one I'd thought of, actually. I mean, and that would work quite smoothly, actually, I think, as well. You know, if it's the Bronze Daleks and that Legion who sort of recruit the Doctor to sort of fight back against the defense drone Daleks on Earth, that would be a cool turn of events, I think. I mean, looking at the story, looking at the footage and the photos we've got, I mean, we know, well, we've only seen the Doctor in her prison gear in prison, so, you know, how she escapes or where else she gets to is a surprise at the moment. I mean, is she going to go back to Earth or back to the Dalek ship? I mean, we don't know, and we know that there's some stuff set inside the TARDIS early on, the classic era style TARDIS that the fan were in, and I think Yaz is sleeping in. We know there's some stuff inside Graham's front room, again, probably pretty early on.
With that infamous table shot.
The infamous table, yes. Gotta love the table and gotta love Graham's front room. We know there's some stuff with the Dalek embryo mutant things as well, and that green lit room, which is presumably on Earth, I suppose. And then somehow, I guess, because we see an exterior shot of a Dalek saucer in the sky, I guess I'm assuming that somehow all the key players end up on that ship towards the end of the story. I mean, we've got a few photos and bits of footage, I think,
Yeah.
showing Jack on that ship with some bronze Daleks, and Graham and Ryan there too. So I guess if I was to kind of predict the plot very broadly, I would say that's what's happened. What's going to happen? It's going to end up with them on that Dalek ship. The more I think about it, surely there's got to be some kind of someone or something leading those Daleks on that ship. I don't want to get my hopes up, but something would be really cool and raise the stakes. I mean, some people suggested that this is a trilogy with the Dalek themed New Year's specials, and we might get Davros in the third one. Obviously we've had Resolution, we've got Revolution here, which will be the second, and then there might be another one in the future. I mean, that's completely hypothetical, but maybe that would make more sense, because then it would give Davros more space and time to shine. But I suppose that's what I'm secretly holding out hope for, but I don't get my hopes up too much. I think even without Davros, Revolution of the Daleks will still be a great story. But surely there are some things that they have not told us about, apart from the circumstances of Graham and Ryan's departure. Surely there are some other secrets up their sleeve. I mean, it's a long episode. It's about 70.
It's an extended episode.
Yeah. So it's the first time an episode has been that long since. Oh gosh, I think
Deep Breath.
The Doctor and Deep Breath. Yeah. That's the last time. And Deep Breath in particular is an episode that I think for many at the time and going back to now seems quite drawn out in places. I think to a lot of people. I mean, I can certainly see that a little bit. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how it goes with the pacing and how everything is fitted in and just sort of, I don't know, just what ends up happening. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly fun to speculate, and I think that extended episode, like the extended runtime of the episode, has gave me more hope, because I was worried that it was almost going to go in a similar way to the Timeless Children, whereas my worry for the Timeless Children was that there was so much in that story that had to pay off that, it wasn't going to satisfyingly pay off everything, and at least in my opinion it didn't really. The Cybermen got quite sidelined in that story, and obviously the whole thing with Ashad and stuff kind of goes nowhere. And I was kind of worried that going into Revolution of the Daleks, there's so much stuff in it that at first when I was just hearing it all announced, it just kind of like Chris Chibnall throwing everything he has at a wall and seeing what sticks. But having this, extended runtime, having the trailers and stuff to really kind of gauge where all these pieces are gonna fit together, I do actually have a lot more hope that he will be able to successfully pay this all off. And yes, certainly I do like that idea of the Doctor having to form an alliance with the Daleks in some way, whether it was the idea I came up with the Doctor having to form an alliance with Davros in prison, or the one you came up with, which maybe the Dalek fleet break the Doctor out of prison to try and help them against these new Daleks. That would certainly be interesting. I think maybe if Davros is also with those legion of Daleks, but not fully in control, a bit like Journey's End. Perhaps you could have some parallels where they're both almost being kind of like forced to help the Daleks in some way and not having full control. And maybe the Doctor and Davros, I wouldn't say could bond on that, but kind of share some kind of similar stuff about their situation. Who knows? Obviously, that's just on the wild theory that the Daleks will break the Doctor out of prison, or that plot thread will tie in with the Daleks in some way more, which I'm not so sure it will. But also, that's also basing off on the fact that Davros will be in it, which we have no indication that he will be. That's just wishful thinking on mine and yours part. Yeah. But it would be so great to have Davros in it. But yeah, I certainly think that it's great to speculate, and obviously we have had a lot announced, but the fact that we still don't have other stuff announced, it does make it certainly fun to speculate. I think. Because there's so much we have spoken about so much about obviously Series 12 and speculating on Revolution of the Daleks and Series 13 and kind of speaking about that, which as I said is a testament to Series 12, but also it does show that almost I've been a critic of the marketing for the Christian era and the lack of anything they've really given us. But I suppose on the flip side, obviously in that way it just allows us to speculate so much more, because obviously you think back to the Moffat era and World Enough and Time the Doctor Falls, there was stuff to speculate, but there was so much that had essentially already been confirmed for us. Maybe seeing the trailers we could have thought, they could be doing, is that a genesis of the Sideman story? But obviously knowing the Mondasian Sidemen were going to be in it, seeing them in the trailer, we practically already knew. So there wasn't really much to speculate on that. We knew the Master was going to appear at some point, so there wasn't really much to speculate. Whereas with this, we know certain things are going to happen. Obviously, they have announced Captain Jack. They have announced, Ryan and Graham are leaving, but also there's so much that they haven't said. And as you said, it does feel that there may just be one last big reveal that they've really tried to keep under wraps.
I hope so. Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it would certainly be in keeping with the era, I think, because there's a precedent for it. We've had shocks. I mean, even going back to the death of Grace in The Woman Who Fell to Earth, who could have seen?
Well, yeah.
Well, I say that. I mean, I suppose you could have guessed, or but other things. I mean, even something as bonkers as the frog sitting on a chair and takes you away. Is something that just no one saw coming. Regardless of what you think of that. I'm trying to think of other exact examples now. I mean, obviously there's the Dalek in Resolution, and in particular seeing that Dalek design for the first time.
Well, yeah, that hadn't been leaked to my knowledge.
It hadn't been anywhere. For better or for worse, it wasn't part of the marketing. People, I mean, okay, it's a bit questionable that it was a bit of a risk to leave it out of the marketing, and some would say it was detrimental to that episode's sort of success, really. But at the same time, you get that epic moment where you're literally seeing that Dalek for the first time, and sort of your eyes are fixed to the screen because you're just trying to work out exactly what it is and sort of visualize it in your head and build a sort of 360 view of it in your head and commit it to your memory. And then obviously, the Master, as we've already mentioned, and things like the Ruth Doctor, like Captain Jack's return, the more obvious twists and the Time as Child that we got in Series 12, and things like, seeing Tecto and seeing Gallifrey again, and just all those things. Yeah, so there's definitely a precedent in the era for things to be held back. And as I say, some would say that they're held back too much. But I don't know. I mean, at this point, I genuinely don't know which side of the coin to go with, really. Whether, I mean, I would have thought there are some surprises still to come. I think they've gone on record as saying that there are some, but it's just what form those surprises will take, and knowing how high to aim, I suppose, in terms of our hopes. But so we can hope. Yeah,
we can certainly hope, and I mean, I don't want to get my hopes up and hope Davros is in it, and then he inevitably won't be. But I think that it's certainly fun to speculate. As you mentioned right at the start, this is our last chance to really speculate on Revolution of the Daleks and what will entail in that story. And I think certainly I am optimistic going in. I mean, I was already optimistic, but really just, speculating so much with you today about Revolution of the Daleks, I'm actually really optimistic going into this story, and I really hope it is a good story. And yeah, knowing that, I mean, I don't really know, but I don't think we're going to get a Doctor Who for a while. I mean, they're aiming for end of 2021 release date for Series 13, but who knows? It could be early 2022. We don't know. That's all depending on the circumstances that happen in 2021. We could get another lockdown. Who knows? And then obviously filming would be yet again pushed back. But I really hope that at least for the cycle of stories, obviously starting with Spyfall and ending a year later with Revolution of the Daleks, I really hope it can end this run on a high, and yeah, I am really looking forward to it, and I can't wait for New Year's Day when we can just watch this story.
Yeah, well, me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, so certainly I'm really looking forward to it, and hopefully Revolution of the Daleks is very good. But yeah, we've been recording for quite a while now, Richard. An hour and 40 minutes going by OBS. So yeah, I suppose we can wrap it up here. I feel as if we've had a great chat. Obviously, I mentioned at the start of the podcast that it was going to be. It's obviously a New Year's special. It's more of a reflective podcast. I feel like we have done a fair bit of reflection, obviously, on Series 12, on the threads that set up, on the the character journeys, the recontextualization of some of the episodes, but also we have been reflecting, but also I suppose, which is what you'd probably do, surrounding the new year. You look back and you also look forward as well. And I feel like we've done a lot of that as well, looking forward, obviously, to the incoming special that is Revolution of the Daleks, which is just a couple of days away, really. And obviously when this goes out will literally be, maybe just a day away. But and then obviously further than that, obviously we spoke about, what Series 12 and Revolution of the Daleks could set up and could mean for Series 13, and yeah, it's been a great discussion, really speaking about that. And as someone who he kind of considers himself not the biggest fan of this current era, just speaking about it with you actually has given me a new appreciation for this era and for what Chibnall was trying to do, because I haven't been a big fan of a lot of his creative decisions, but yeah, this chat has given me a lot of appreciation for what he's trying to do and what he's setting up. And regardless of some of the decisions that he's made that I may not agree with, I think that certainly he is setting up some interesting things for the future that will certainly be interesting to see how they all get paid off.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, certainly. It's been great. It's been great chatting to you, Richard. It's been great having you on again.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been great having you on as a guest for this special episode of the podcast. It's been great to reflect and speculate with you on all of this Doctor Who goodness, and it's been great having you back. Thanks so much for coming on again.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Is there anything you wanna plug before we wrap this up?
Go and subscribe to me on YouTube, please, if you'd like to. Just at Richard Lloyd for similar sort of content to what I've discussed here, really. And you can also find me on Twitter at StetsonDoctor. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys should definitely go subscribe to Richard. He makes great content. I've been really enjoying your recent content, Richard. I've been really enjoying your Christmas collabs with you and Miles. They've been great.
Well, there's one more to come on New Year's Day, so it'll be just after this is released, I suppose. So you can look forward to that.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys should definitely go subscribe to Richard for great content. And yeah, you've been a great guest, Richard. Thanks so much for coming on. And thank you to everyone who is still listening at this point. if you've got nothing to do on New Year's Eve, which, may be a possibility because, COVID and all that sorts of stuff with the different tiers, I don't know why you would want to, but, if you would there and you've decided to listen to this on New Year's Eve, or, after the fact and just laughing at us speculating that Davros was coming back, who knows, but, regardless, if you're still listening at this point, thank you guys so much for listening. It means a lot, and yeah, thank you so much, Richard, for coming on. It's been a great discussion.
Well, great. Thank you once again for having me, and yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on. Thanks everyone for watching, and thank you all. Just in general, I suppose. I hope you guys all have a great 2021, regardless of the circumstances. And obviously, I hope you guys all had a good Christmas. And thank you guys for watching. Thank you, Richard, for coming on. And of course, a goodbye.